This is All About Bitcoin, a show dedicated to all things questions and markets related to Bitcoin, little b for the currency, and Bitcoin, big B for the network. A collective journey to understand, apply, and use this innovation, all Bitcoin, all the time. I'm your host, Christine Lee. Let's have a live look at Bitcoin right now. The CoinDesk Bitcoin price XBX index is trading down about almost 6% over the past 24 hours. At $55,974. The most reliable reference prices for institutions since 2014 are now published under the CoinDesk brand, trusted globally as the leader in crypto news, events, and data. So let's take a look at some of our top stories. El Salvador is going to build an entire city based on Bitcoin. President Nayib Bukele announcing at Bitcoin Week in El Salvador that the Bitcoin city will be located along the Gulf of Fonseca. Draw power from a nearby volcano to provide energy for both the city and Bitcoin mining, and have zero income, property, capital gains, and payroll taxes. Bukele also saying El Salvador plans on issuing a $1 billion worth of Bitcoin bonds, a tokenized financial instrument developed by BLOCKSTREAM denominated in US dollars on the Liquid network. Meanwhile, Fed Chair Jerome Powell has been renominated for a second term to lead the U.S. Central Bank by President Joe Biden. Fed Governor Lael Brainerd was speculated to be Powell's replacement. Instead, he has been appointed vice chair. And finally, Square releasing a white paper detailing protocol for a decentralized Bitcoin exchange last Friday. The white paper from Square's new to-be-determined division describes a protocol for exchanging digital and other assets in a way that's more accessible to everyone.
The chart of the day is brought to you by Crypto.com, the world's fastest growing crypto app.
El Salvador's Bitcoin bond specifications seen here in a presentation by El Salvador President Nayib Bukele this weekend. El Salvador will issue $1 billion worth of bonds, of Bitcoin bonds, as I mentioned earlier, with a 10-year maturity on the Liquid network. Half the money raised will be used to purchase Bitcoin, and the other $500 million will fund construction of a new Bitcoin city along the Gulf of Fonseca near a volcano. The bond, developed by BlockStream and processed by Bitfinex, will offer annual interest payments of 6.5%. Investors will also receive dividends generated by staggered liquidation of Bitcoin holdings after a 5-year lockup. The annualized yield back to investors could reach 146% in the 10th year, based on BlockStream models suggesting that Bitcoin will rally to $1 million. Credit ratings firms have already cast the Central American country's Bitcoin foray as a negative. Earlier this year, Moody's downgraded the country's credit to basically junk, citing the decision to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender as a sign of weak governance. Bannockburn Global Forex telling CoinDesk, quote, that El Salvador bonds are sufficiently risky, and adding Bitcoin on top of that precludes most retail investors and more institutional investors. Joining us now to discuss is BitBull Capital CEO Joe DiPasquale. Hello there, Joe. Thanks for joining us. So upon hearing this news, who do you think will actually buy these Bitcoin bonds?
Thanks for having me on, Christine. It's an interesting question because, there has been a lot of disagreement from Bitcoin loyalists and maximalists who believe that over 100%, annual rate versus the U.S. Treasury bond, about a 0.1% annual rate. So really, it's again that question of the Bitcoin maximalists. And to answer your question, I do see more and more large institutional investors, even trying a bit of Bitcoin as opposed to, let's say, gold. So I think it's anyone from a high net worth individual who believes in Bitcoin to even larger players, in corporate treasuries included.
I was thinking this is huge news for El Salvador, for the Bitcoin community, yet I'm seeing that the price of Bitcoin is actually in retreat. Why do you think that is?
It is in retreat, but we've done a lot of analysis internally at BitBull Capital about the reasons for that. And again, after all-time highs, you do see this retreat. There is Bitcoin's now trading at about 56K. There's a ton of support at 55, 54K. And so it's not something that concerns me. It's something that I see as, when a month like October goes up 40% for Bitcoin, yes, there's going to be some retracement in November. It's not a surprise. And I'm actually very heartened by Biden's nomination of Jerome Powell, and I think that'll be good for crypto and Bitcoin.
What was your reaction when you first heard about this Bitcoin city? And it's a huge experiment.
It is a huge experiment, but it's the first country really doing this experiment. Many people say, okay, Bitcoin, the end point is paying your taxes at the end of the day. And can you do that in Bitcoin? And with El Salvador, as you mentioned, they might have a VAT tax, but other than that, no taxes. And importantly, no CO2 emissions, they also say, given how they're doing the mining. So for me, it's incredibly exciting. They're working in conjunction with Bitfinex and others to improve Bitcoin to be able to launch this bond. So it'll be very interesting, and I think it's important. And I hope to see other nations, small nations, initially follow.
Mm-hmm. Well, I did notice Bitfinex is processing the payments, and what are the chances that their sister company Tether could end up buying the Bitcoin bonds and use them as their reserves?
Yes. Well, so Tether, I think, is under a lot of scrutiny, as we know. And so right now, they're very focused on ensuring that everyone knows that there's $1 per Tether out there. I do think we've seen interplay with Bitfinex before and Tether. And so, but the sense I get is that they want to do everything by the book. There was a lot of talk about how it's audited. And so I don't think there will be, I think they'll avoid that, to answer your question. I think they'll avoid that in this case. Given previous.
But in general, in this, amid this news in El Salvador, do you think that we'll eventually see this as a catalyst for a price rise? And I would put forth one idea is that, as part of this Bitcoin bond product, they are going to lock in $500 million worth of Bitcoin away. So already that $500 million is off the market.
That's right. So let's just take this back to, what Bitcoin is. It is a finite asset, right? So that there's going to be another purchase of $500 million of Bitcoin. And we also know that it's a hedge against, how the inflationary practices of many nations, including the US, where in the US, we're not even talking about actually any sort of tightening. We're just tapering the easing. So there's continued money printing and buying of mortgage-backed securities and more. And so it's very interesting, I think, to base an actual region on a city on Bitcoin and on the finite promises of it, and to launch new products on it like this bond. So it's very good news for Bitcoin, and all of the doom and gloom about, El Salvador, and it makes them maybe they have bad financial policy. People were saying the same of Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy a year ago when he bought Bitcoin. They were saying, oh, wow, that corporate treasury is clearly misrun. And you know what? He multiple times the market cap of MicroStrategy, but making such an intelligent move that most people thought wasn't.
Indeed. And a company is one thing, though. A country, a whole other sack of potatoes. So we'll see what happens. Yes. Just a final question. End of year outlook, any price target for Bitcoin?
So BitBull Capital remains its $75K price target for Bitcoin. Last time we talked, Christine, and actually it was around the market high. It was the day after the all-time high of Bitcoin. And I mentioned to you that at BitBull, we have a little bit more sober look on the price of Bitcoin. And the good news about that is that we're often right. And so we believe that the price target will be about $75K at the end of the year.
All right. Joe, thanks for some sobering commentary and analysis on Bitcoin. Appreciate your insights. That was BitBull Capital CEO Joe DiPasquale. Coming up, we'll have more Bitcoin discussion on El Salvador with Peter McCormack. El Salvador is building a Bitcoin city, and joining us now to discuss more is our favorite Bitcoin maxi, Peter McCormack, host of the podcast, What Bitcoin Did. Hello there, Peter. So I gotta say, for such a big announcement, Bitcoin didn't actually do much. As I said in the previous segment, it's actually in retreat. What's going on?
Yeah, well, look, good to see you again. Yes, it's a big announcement, but these are plans for the creation of a Bitcoin city and the plans for the creation of a Bitcoin bond. But they don't actually, you tend to find that sometimes you can see the news will shoot the price up and then it'll come down because the fundamentals haven't changed. No new Bitcoin has been taken off the market. So it doesn't really surprise me. Bitcoin never seems to do what you expect it to do. No, that doesn't surprise me at all. I didn't expect to see a big boost in the price. I mean, I remember last year at Bitcoin at 2021 or earlier in the year at Bitcoin 2021, where we had the announcement that they were making Bitcoin legal tender. We didn't see a move in the price. So I've got used to this happening. It's not a big deal.
Fair enough. All right. So have you been to El Salvador recently? Were you there for the announcement? I'd like to get a sense of the mood going on along the conference and the whole Bitcoin week.
No, I actually missed out on this event. I've been to El Salvador 6 times now, but I'd been out in the US for work for 2 months. So when I got back to Bedford, back to England, I had to give this trip a miss. But a lot of people out there. I've caught up with a lot of people there amongst the kind of madness and the events, and found out what was going on. And look, I think there's a mixture of feelings about this. There is optimism for what this means for Bitcoin. There's some interest in the fact that they are going to be creating these Bitcoin bonds. There's some interest behind the city, but at the same time, there's also some skeptical people who are still questioning what the intentions are of Bukele and whether the president's the ability to deliver upon this. But mostly it's interesting information, and I think as a Bitcoiner, we're always taught to be skeptical, to trust no one. So we should wait and see until this actually plays out.
What are your thoughts on these Bitcoin bonds? Because as part of the model, BLOCKSTREAM is estimating 146% APY eventually based on Bitcoin hitting $1 million in 5 years or so. Is that realistic?
I mean, yeah, it's realistic. Bitcoin can do anything. We've seen it. Thing back in 2017 when the price started under $1,000 and finished at $20,000 before the dip. We've seen Bitcoin in the past year go from 4,000 low at the Black Swan event before COVID up to a high of 69,000. I think we tagged last week. So look, can Bitcoin go from 69,000 to $1 million? I think it's a lot easier to go to 69,000 to.
I think we lost Peter there. He's frozen. Though I just want to correct myself. I misspoke. The bond is expected to be, is based on modeling by BLOCKSTREAM that estimates Bitcoin will be $1 million in 10 years. All right. So that was Peter McCormack, and we thank you, as always, the podcast host of What Bitcoin Did. All right, we're going to wrap it up there. That's it for All About Bitcoin. I'm your host, Christine Lee, and we'll do it all over again tomorrow at 3 p.m. in New York. Join us tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for First Mover. You're watching CoinDesk TV.